Inshallah, for the next example that's found within the Qur'an, an example that causes us to reflect, we move to the 6th chapter of the Qur'an, Surah Al-An'am, a surah that's filled with conversations that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has with us about how the creation was made in such diverse ways, so that we might reflect that our own creation and our own experience of life is actually going to be diverse. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in ayah 122 of the surah says, وَمَنْ كَانَ مَيْتًا فَأَحْيَيْنَاهُ وَجَعَلْنَا لَهُ نُورًا يَمْشِي بِهِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and it's like the one who was dead, and we gave him light, and we gave him life, and we made for him light by which he could walk amongst the people. And the approach here, this example takes a little bit more thought, because it's not given as just a parable, but actually to understand this one a little bit more appropriately, we have to go to the circumstance of its revelation. It's generally been agreed by the scholars that this was a verse that was revealed about Hamza radiallahu anhu, the uncle of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, almost the best friend of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam throughout much of his life, because Hamza radiallahu anhu shared a very special bond with the Messenger. One was he was his uncle, but he was very close in age, just 2 or 3 years apart from him, and to the point that they were actually raised in the same household. So they had a very close bond. But the story that takes place is, as many of us know the story about the conversion of Hamza radiallahu anhu, it occurs in a very specific circumstance in which it's a couple of years in, it's actually the 6th year of revelation. So 6 years have passed that the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam is calling people towards Islam. And it's only a handful of followers, to the point where there wasn't much power found behind the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And one major incident that took place is the Muslims were being persecuted. And one particular time, the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in Mecca doing sujood to the Kaaba, to Jerusalem actually, which was the first Qibla, but he was doing it in front of the Kaaba. And at that time, he's in a very vulnerable position. Abu Jahl had actually placed on top of him the entrails of a camel, so the intestines of a camel right on top, so that he couldn't really get up, and it was very insulting. And no one really came to the aid of the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in that moment, except for his young daughter. And that was seen as a very insulting thing for someone from the same family to do this to him, and to do this in such a sacred place. And what is even worse is no one stepped up to help the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, because if they did, it's being done by Abu Jahl, who's seen as a leader of the Quraysh. So how could this have happened? Hamza radiallahu anhu hears about this. And he had already known about the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam in terms of that he's been preaching Islam, preaching to only worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But he rushes over to Abu Jahl. And the actual narration says that when he rushes over to him, he had just finished a hunt. And Hamza radiallahu anhu was someone who was known to be a warrior, someone known to be very respected. And he comes from Banu Hashim, the same tribe as the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam, versus Abu Jahl, who comes from Banu Makhzum. But that's not as important. He goes right up to Abu Jahl. This would be the equivalent of someone going up to maybe a governor, someone going up to a senator, someone who's really respected that you can't just do something publicly to. And he has his bow in his hands and he hits him with it right across the face. And then he says, "How dare you do this to?" And then he says to my nephew, he says to the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And then Abu Jahl retorts right away, saying, "Do you know what he's saying about our gods? Do you know what he's saying about our way of life?" And then Hamza radiallahu anhu in anger actually says, and I believe in what he believes in. And it's this approach that in that moment, Hamza radiallahu anhu went from a state of being dead to a state of being given life in that moment. And then what happened? Allah says, "Lahu nuran yamshi bihi," and then he walks with light as a result of it. That there are times in which maybe we have some good qualities, but it's not being done for the right purpose. It's almost as if it's this wasted potential and wasted talent. It's this idea of you're walking around, but there's no light. What happens when there's no light and you're walking? You might as well not be walking, because you don't know where you're going. You can't guide anyone else to it. And you don't know whether you reached your destination or whether you've stayed in the same place. You need light by which to actually navigate the world around you. And that's like the person who doesn't have belief, that they might be doing things, but where is that actual destination going to? But then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues, في الناس كمن مثله في ظلمات ليس بخارج منها, that it's the person who walks with light among the people is not like the one who is in darkness, never to emerge out of it. كَذَلِكَ زُيِّنَ لِلْكَافِرِينَ مَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. Thus it has been made pleasing to the disbelievers that which they were doing. Because they had no idea that light wasn't necessarily given to them, they actually couldn't navigate anything. But when that light comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and we don't know when that moment occurs. For Hamza radiallahu anhu, what was it? It was his nephew. That loyalty he had to his nephew that suddenly allowed what? Iman to enter into his heart. There are different things that will do that for people, but then that's when the light actually enters. So the best of what they already had gets made even better by the light of revelation. And that's what we have to really appreciate from this parable, is this approach that we can have good characteristics. We can have good qualities. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might have blessed you with many types of blessings, but when it gets used, when that light hits and it's used for an actual strong purpose, that's when you go from someone who is metaphorically dead to metaphorically living, because finally light has hit it and given it a purpose.